David Winters stared at the red numbers flashing on his computer screen. Down another 12%. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his third cup of coffee that morning. The CEO of Aquatech Solutions had seen many challenges in his 15 years of running the company, but nothing like this. The clock on his mahogany desk showed 6:47 a.m., and he had already been at work for 2 hours. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was just waking up. But David felt like he hadn't slept in weeks. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights spent trying to solve what his team was calling the impossible problem. 8 months ago, everything had seemed perfect. Aquatech's revolutionary water purification system was supposed to change the world. The technology promised to bring clean drinking water to millions of people in developing countries. Investors had poured $200 million into the project. The media called it the breakthrough of the century. David had even been featured on magazine covers as the man who would end the global water crisis. But then reality hit hard. The first reports came from a small village in Kenya. The water purification units they had installed started failing after just 2 weeks. The filters were getting clogged and the water coming out wasn't clean anymore. David's team told him it was just a minor issue that could be fixed quickly. Then more reports started flooding in. Villages in India, communities in Peru, towns in Bangladesh. Everywhere they had installed their systems, the same problem kept happening. The advanced membrane technology that worked perfectly in their clean American laboratories was failing miserably in the real world. The engineering team, led by some of the smartest people David had ever met, worked around the clock. They ran test after test, built prototype after prototype, spent millions on new materials and designs. Nothing worked. The high-tech filters kept clogging when they encountered the muddy, sediment-filled water that was common in the places that needed clean water most. David pushed back from his desk and walked to the massive whiteboard that covered one entire wall of his office. It was filled with diagrams, equations, and notes written in different colored markers. Red ink showed the problems, blue showed attempted solutions, and black showed the failures. There was a lot more red and black than blue. He thought about the phone call he had received yesterday from his biggest investor. The conversation still made his stomach turn. "David, we need to talk. Our board is getting nervous. $200 million and 8 months later, we're no closer to a solution. Some people are saying we should cut our losses. Cut their losses." The words echoed in his mind. It wasn't just about the money, though losing $200 million would probably end his career. It was about the people they had promised to help. The mothers in rural villages who still had to walk miles to find clean water for their children. The communities that had trusted them to deliver on their promise. David's phone buzzed. Another text from his head engineer. Prototype 47 failed. Same clogging issue. Team meeting at 9 a.m. Prototype 47. They had built and tested 47 different versions of their system. Each time they thought they had found the answer. Each time they were wrong. The worst part was the media attention. Reporters who had once praised his company were now writing articles with headlines like "The $200 million mistake" and "When good intentions go bad." His company's stock price had dropped 60%. In the last 3 months, David slumped into his leather chair and rubbed his temples. His wife had barely seen him in weeks. His kids asked why Daddy was always at work and never smiled anymore. The pressure was crushing him from every direction. Down the hallway, Rosa Morales pushed her cleaning cart quietly along the polished marble floor. At 43 years old, she had been working as a janitor in this building for almost 4 years. Every weekday evening after most employees had gone home, Rosa would arrive to clean the offices on the executive floor. Most people barely noticed her. She would empty trash cans, vacuum carpets, clean windows, and dust furniture, while the building settled into its nighttime quiet. Rosa didn't mind being invisible. It gave her time to think, and more importantly, it helped her pay for her children's education. Rosa had 2 kids, Miguel, who was 17 and dreamed of becoming a doctor, and Sophia, who was 14 and loved mathematics. Every dollar Rosa earned went toward keeping them in school and buying the books and supplies they needed. She worked this job from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m., then went home to sleep for a few hours before her kids woke up for school. What most people at Aquatech didn't know was that Rosa was incredibly smart. Back in Guatemala, Before she moved to the United States, she had studied chemistry at the university. She never finished her degree because her family needed money, but her love for science never died. 3 nights a week after her children went to bed, Rosa would sit at her kitchen table and take online chemistry courses. She used an old laptop she had bought secondhand and dreamed of someday finishing her education. The textbooks and scientific journals she studied were written in English, which had forced her to become fluent in the language much faster than she had expected. As Rosa cleaned the executive floor, she often overheard conversations and saw documents left on desks. She never meant to eavesdrop or pry into company business, but her scientific mind couldn't help but notice the technical diagrams and equations that were often visible. Over the past few months, she had watched David Winters transform from a confident, energetic leader into a stressed, exhausted man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. She had seen the evolution of the whiteboard in his office, watched it fill up with increasingly desperate attempts to solve whatever problem was consuming the company. Rosa felt sorry for him. Despite their different positions in the company hierarchy, she recognized the look of someone who cared deeply about their work and was suffering because they couldn't find a way to help the people they wanted to help. Tonight was different, though. As Rosa approached David's office with her cleaning supplies, she could hear his voice through the slightly open door. He was on a video call and he sounded more frustrated than she had ever heard him. Rosa hesitated. She usually waited until offices were empty before cleaning them, but it was getting late and she still had 12 more offices to clean before her shift ended. She decided to wait in the hallway until his call was finished. But as she stood there organizing her cleaning supplies, she couldn't help but listen to what David was saying. And what she heard made her heart race with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. The problem that was destroying this company, that was keeping David awake at night, that had consumed $200 million and 8 months of work by brilliant engineers. Rosa was pretty sure she knew how to solve it. Rosa stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding as she listened to David's voice coming from his office. She had never heard him sound so defeated. Through the slightly open door, she could see the glow of his computer screen and the massive whiteboard covered in diagrams and equations. The membrane technology is failing again, David was saying to someone on his video call. His voice was hoarse, like he had been talking for hours. Every single installation in high-sediment environments clogs within 2 weeks. We've tried 17 different membrane compositions and nothing works. Rosa recognized some of the technical terms he was using. Membrane filtration was something she had studied in her online chemistry courses. She found herself taking a small step closer to the door, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "The particles are too fine," came a woman's voice from the computer speakers. "They're getting trapped in the membrane pores, creating a biofilm layer that blocks water flow. We've increased the pore size, but then contaminants pass through. We've decreased it, but it clogs even faster." David rubbed his forehead and turned toward the whiteboard. Rosa could see him clearly now through the gap in the door. He looked exhausted, his usually neat hair disheveled, his tie loosened around his neck. "What about backwashing the system more frequently?" asked another voice from the call. "We tried that," David replied, pointing to a section of the whiteboard covered in red ink. "It helps temporarily, but it uses too much water. In areas where clean water is scarce, we can't afford to waste 40% of the filtered water just to clean the membranes." Rosa's eyes widened as she looked at the whiteboard. Even from the hallway, she could see the complex diagram showing water molecules, filtration layers, and particle sizes. Her mind began racing as she recognized the problem they were describing. "The pressure differential across the membrane creates a concentration gradient," continued the woman on the call. "We're essentially creating the perfect conditions for fouling. It's like we're fighting against basic physics." That's when it hit Rosa like a lightning bolt. She knew this problem. Not from textbooks or online courses, but from real life. Growing up in a small village in Guatemala, Rosa had watched her grandmother deal with muddy river water during the rainy season. The village had no modern filtration system, but her grandmother had developed a method that worked amazingly well. She used layers of different materials, sand, gravel, charcoal, and something else. Something that Rosa had never understood as a child but now realized was brilliant. Her grandmother had used pieces of cactus, specifically the inner flesh of prickly pear cactus, which she would slice and layer between sand and charcoal. Rosa remembered thinking it was just an old wives' tale, but the water that came out was always crystal clear. "We need to think outside the box here," David was saying, his frustration evident. "There has to be something we're missing. Some approach we haven't considered." Rosa's mind was spinning. In her chemistry courses, she had learned about biomimetic filtration, copying nature's own filtration methods. She had read about how cactus plants naturally filter water, using their internal structure to remove impurities while allowing clean water to pass through. The cactus method wasn't just folklore, it was actually scientific. The plant fibers created a natural gradient that captured particles of different sizes at different levels, preventing the clogging that was destroying David's expensive membrane systems. "What if we're approaching this completely wrong?" came another voice from the video call. "What if instead of trying to force water through a single barrier, we created multiple filtration stages?" "We tried staged filtration," David replied wearily. 3 stages, 5 stages, 7 stages. The first stage still clogs up and then the whole system fails." Rosa wanted to shout through the door, "But you're using the wrong materials. You're creating artificial barriers when nature already solved this problem millions of years ago." Instead, she gripped her mop handle tighter and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Who was she to think she knew better than a team of engineers with advanced degrees and unlimited resources? But as she listened to the call continue, Rosa realized that all their solutions were focused on high-tech approaches. They were trying to engineer their way out of a problem using expensive materials and complex systems. They weren't thinking about simple, natural solutions that could be implemented locally using available resources. "The manufacturing cost per unit is now over $3,000, David was explaining to the people on the call. "Even if we solve the clogging problem, these communities can't afford to maintain such expensive equipment." Rosa almost gasped. $3,000 per unit? Her grandmother's filtration system had cost maybe $20 in materials and could be rebuilt by anyone in the village using local resources. "We need a breakthrough, and we need it fast," David continued. "The board is losing patience. If we can't solve this in the next month, they're talking about shutting down the entire project." The call ended with promises to reconvene the next morning with fresh ideas and new approaches. Rosa heard David's chair creak as he leaned back, and she saw him put his head in his hands. Rosa quietly backed away from the door and pretended to organize her cleaning cart. Her mind was racing with possibilities. The solution seemed so obvious to her now, but how could she possibly explain it? How could a janitor approach the CEO of a major corporation with advice about water filtration? She thought about her children at home, probably doing their homework at the kitchen table. Miguel was studying advanced biology, dreaming of becoming a doctor so he could help people. Sophia was working on calculus problems, her notebooks filled with neat equations and precise diagrams. Both of her children were smart enough to understand the technical aspects of what she had just heard. They would probably encourage her to speak up, to share what she knew. But they didn't understand the real world the way Rosa did. They didn't know how differently people treated you when you cleaned their offices instead of sitting in boardroom meetings. Rosa had experienced enough discrimination to know that her accent, her job title, and her lack of formal credentials would make most people dismiss her ideas before she even finished explaining them. Even if she was right, even if she could save the company millions of dollars, would anyone listen to a woman who emptied their trash cans? But as she stood in that hallway thinking about David's exhausted face and remembering the villages that were waiting for clean water, Rosa realized this wasn't really about her. It wasn't about whether people would take her seriously or whether she might embarrass herself. It was about the mothers who were still walking miles to find clean water for their children. It was about the communities that had trusted this company to help them. It was about solving a problem that could save lives. Rosa took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. She would find a way to tell David what she knew. She would find a way to share her grandmother's wisdom with his team of engineers, even if they laughed at her, even if they thought she was crazy, even if it cost her her job. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up even when you're afraid. Rosa spent the rest of that night cleaning offices on autopilot. Her hands moved automatically, emptying trash cans, wiping down desks, vacuuming carpets, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She kept thinking about David's defeated voice and the technical problem that was consuming his company. By the time she finished her shift at 3 a.m., Rosa had made up her mind. She would talk to David, but she needed to do it right. She couldn't just walk into his office and start talking about cactus plants. She needed to show him that she understood the problem from a scientific perspective. Rosa went home and spent the next 4 hours researching everything she could find about membrane filtration, biomimetic water treatment, and natural filtration systems. She filled 3 pages of her notebook with diagrams and calculations, drawing on everything she had learned in her chemistry courses. When her children woke up for school, they found their mother sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks and scientific papers. "Mom, did you sleep at all?" Miguel asked, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. "I might have found a way to help someone at work," Rosa replied, not wanting to explain the full situation. Sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places. Sophia looked at her mother's notebook, filled with chemical formulas and filtration diagrams. "This looks like the stuff I study in chemistry class. Are you working on some kind of science project?" Rosa smiled at her daughter. "Something like that." After the kids left for school, Rosa tried to sleep, but she was too nervous. Instead, she spent the day refining her presentation. She drew cleaner diagrams, organized her thoughts, and practiced explaining the concept in simple terms. That evening, Rosa arrived at work 30 minutes early. She wanted to catch David before he got overwhelmed with meetings and phone calls. Her hands were shaking as she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway toward his office. Through his open door, she could see David sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen with the same tired expression she had seen the night before. The whiteboard behind him looked even more chaotic, with new red marks indicating more failed attempts. Rosa knocked gently on the doorframe. "Excuse me, Mr. Winters?" David looked up, clearly surprised to see her. Most of the cleaning staff worked around him, not with him. "Oh, hi, Rosa. Is everything okay? Do you need something?" Rosa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I was wondering if I could talk to you about something. It's about your water filtration problem." David's eyebrows raised in confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" "Last night I couldn't help but overhear your phone call about the membrane clogging issues," Rosa said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think I might know a solution." David leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked like amused skepticism. "Rosa, I appreciate your concern, but this is a very technical engineering problem. We have some of the smartest people in the industry working on it." "I know it sounds crazy," Rosa said quickly before she lost her nerve. "But please, just give me 5 minutes to explain. If you think I'm wasting your time, I'll never mention it again." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because David gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Okay, 5 minutes." Rosa sat down and opened her notebook. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice grew steadier as she began to explain. "The problem with your membrane system is that you're trying to stop all the particles at one barrier. This creates what we call concentration polarization. All the contaminants build up in one layer and form a biofilm." David's expression changed from polite interest to genuine attention. Rosa was using technical terms correctly, and her explanation made sense. "Where I grew up in Guatemala," Rosa continued, "we had similar problems with muddy river water during rainy season. My grandmother developed a filtration method that worked perfectly, even with very dirty water. At the time I thought it was just folk wisdom, but now I understand the science behind it." Rosa opened her notebook and showed David a carefully drawn diagram. Instead of one membrane, she used multiple layers of different materials: sand, gravel, charcoal, and pieces of prickly pear cactus. Each layer captured different-sized particles, preventing any one layer from getting overwhelmed. David leaned forward, studying the diagram. "Cactus. The inner flesh of prickly pear cactus has natural fibers that create a gradient filtration system," Rosa explained, her confidence growing. "The fibers are arranged in a way that traps particles while allowing water to flow through. It's like nature's own membrane technology, but it doesn't clog because the structure is self-cleaning." Rosa flipped to another page in her notebook. "I've been studying the chemistry behind it. The cactus fibers contain natural compounds that prevent bacterial growth, and the fiber structure creates multiple pathways for water flow. When particles get trapped in one pathway, water automatically flows through others." David was quiet for a long moment, studying Rosa's diagrams and notes. She had clearly put serious thought into this, and her scientific knowledge was impressive. "This is actually quite sophisticated thinking," David said slowly. "But Rosa, how do you know about membrane filtration and concentration polarization? These aren't common terms." Rosa took a deep breath. I studied chemistry at university in Guatemala. I never finished my degree because my family needed money, but I've been taking online chemistry courses for the past 3 years. I understand the science behind what your team is trying to do. David looked at Rosa with new eyes. Here was a woman who had been cleaning his office for months, someone he had barely noticed, and she was discussing advanced filtration chemistry with more clarity than some of his engineers. Let me understand this correctly, David said. You're suggesting we replace our $3,000 membrane system with layers of sand and cactus? Not replace, Rosa corrected. Redesign. Use biomimetic principles to create a gradient filtration system that works like the cactus plant. The materials would be inexpensive and locally available, but the science behind it is solid. Rosa showed him another diagram. Look at your current system. You're forcing water through at high pressure, which actually makes the clogging worse. A biomimetic system would use lower pressure and multiple pathways, making it more efficient and less prone to failure. David stood up and walked to his whiteboard. He studied the red marks that represented months of failed attempts. Our engineering team has been focused on making better membranes, but you're suggesting we abandon the membrane approach entirely. Sometimes the best solutions don't come from making something more complicated, Rosa said. They come from understanding how nature already solved the problem millions of years ago. David turned back to Rosa, and she could see something shifting in his expression. The skepticism was being replaced by curiosity and maybe even excitement. Rosa, if this actually works, it would change everything. A system that costs $20 instead of $3,000 uses local materials and doesn't require specialized maintenance. David paused, the implications hitting him. Every village could afford this. Every community could maintain it themselves. That's the idea, Rosa said softly. Technology should help people, not create more barriers. David looked at Rosa's notebook again, then at his whiteboard covered with failed experiments. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Why didn't you mention this sooner? You've been working here for months. Rosa looked down at her hands. Because I'm the cleaning lady. Would you have listened to me a month ago if I'd walked into your office and started talking about water filtration? Would anyone have taken me seriously? David was quiet for a moment, realizing she was absolutely right. He probably would have dismissed her politely and assumed she didn't understand the complexity of the problem. You're right, he admitted. I probably wouldn't have listened, but I'm listening now. David stared at Rosa's notebook for what felt like an eternity. The office was so quiet that Rosa could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Her heart was still racing from the conversation, and she couldn't tell if David was impressed or just being polite. Finally, David looked up at her. Rosa, I'm going to do something that might seem crazy to some people. I'm going to call an emergency meeting with my engineering team, and I want you to present this idea to them. Rosa's eyes widened. Mr. Winters, I don't think that's a good idea. They're all experts with advanced degrees. They're going to think you've lost your mind bringing the cleaning lady to solve their engineering problem. Maybe I have lost my mind, David said with a slight smile. But sometimes that's exactly what you need to find a breakthrough. Are you willing to do this? Rosa thought about her children at home, probably asleep by now. She thought about the villages still waiting for clean water. She thought about all the times in her life when people had underestimated her because of her job or her accent. Yes, she said quietly. I'll do it. David picked up his phone and started making calls. Within 30 minutes, 5 of Aquatech's top engineers were driving back to the office for an emergency meeting. Rosa could only imagine what they were thinking, being called back to work at 9 p.m. for what David had described as a potential breakthrough from an unexpected source. Dr. James Peterson, the head of engineering, was the first to arrive. He was a tall man with gray hair and thick glasses, someone who had spent 30 years solving complex technical problems. When he walked into David's office and saw Rosa sitting there with her notebook, his confusion was obvious. David, what's going on here? Dr. Peterson asked, glancing between David and Rosa. James, I want you to meet Rosa. She has a potential solution to our filtration problem, and I want the team to hear her out. Dr. Peterson's eyebrows shot up. David, with all due respect, we've spent 8 months and $200 million on this problem. We've consulted with experts from MIT, Stanford, and the best research institutions in the world. What could someone from the maintenance staff possibly tell us that we don't already know? Rosa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. But David stepped forward.
James, that kind of thinking is exactly why we haven't solved this problem yet.
We've been so focused on high-tech solutions that we might have missed something obvious. Just give her 10 minutes. The other engineers began arriving over the next few minutes. Dr. Lisa Chang, the materials scientist. Robert Kumar, the systems designer. Patricia Williams, the chemical engineer. Each one looked surprised and slightly annoyed to be called back to the office for what seemed like an unusual meeting. David gathered everyone around the conference table in his office. Rosa sat at one end, feeling very small surrounded by all these brilliant people with their advanced degrees and years of experience. I know this is unusual, David began, but Rosa has identified what might be a fundamental flaw in our approach. She's going to explain a biomimetic solution that could solve our clogging problem. Dr. Peterson crossed his arms. David, biomimetic filtration has been studied extensively. If there was a simple, natural solution to this problem, don't you think we would have found it by now? Rosa took a deep breath and opened her notebook. Her voice was shaky at first, but it grew stronger as she began to explain the science behind her grandmother's filtration method. The problem with your current system, she said, looking directly at Dr. Peterson, is that you're creating a single point of failure. All the particles concentrate at one membrane barrier, creating the biofilm that clogs your system. She showed them her diagrams of the layered filtration approach. In nature, filtration happens gradually across multiple layers. Each layer captures different-sized particles, and no single layer gets overwhelmed. Dr. Chang leaned forward, studying Rosa's drawings. This is interesting, but how do you prevent bacterial growth in organic filtration materials? Prickly pear cactus has natural antimicrobial properties, Rosa explained. The plant fibers contain compounds that inhibit bacterial growth while maintaining porosity for water flow. Robert Kumar looked skeptical. Even if this works in theory, how do you maintain consistent flow rates? How do you prevent channeling through the filter bed? Rosa flipped to another page in her notebook. The cactus fiber structure creates tortuosity, a twisted path for water flow. This prevents channeling and ensures even distribution across the filter bed. For the next 20 minutes, Rosa answered technical questions that showed she understood filtration chemistry better than most people with engineering degrees. The team slowly began to realize that she wasn't just some random person with a folk remedy. She was proposing a scientifically sound alternative approach. Dr. Peterson finally uncrossed his arms. Rosa, where did you learn all this? I studied chemistry in college, and I've been taking online courses for 3 years, Rosa replied. I may not have a PhD, but I understand the science. David looked around the room. I want to run computer simulations of Rosa's approach. If the models show promise, we build a prototype. Dr. Chang nodded. I can run the simulations tonight. If Rosa is right about the fiber structure and particle capture mechanisms, we should see improved flow rates and reduced fouling. This is crazy, Dr. Peterson muttered, but he was already pulling out his laptop. But it's also the most promising new approach we've heard in months. The team worked through the night. Rosa stayed in the office, helping them understand the specific details of how her grandmother's system worked. She explained the ratios of different materials, the layering technique, and the maintenance process. At 3 a.m., Dr. Chang looked up from her computer with wide eyes. David, you need to see this. The simulation results were displayed on the large monitor in the conference room. Rosa's biomimetic filtration system wasn't just working, it was performing 3 times better than their original design. The particle capture efficiency is 99.7%, Dr. Chang announced. Flow rate is stable across all particle concentrations. And look at this. The system actually becomes more efficient over time as the natural biofilm layer acts as an additional filter. Dr. Peterson was staring at the screen in disbelief. The manufacturing cost analysis shows $23 per unit. $23 versus $3,000, David said quietly. And it works better. Robert Kumar was already sketching prototype designs. We can have a working model built by tomorrow afternoon. The materials are all readily available. Patricia Williams looked at Rosa with a mixture of respect and amazement. Rosa, how long have you been thinking about this problem? Since I was a child watching my grandmother, Rosa replied. I just never realized it was the solution to a $200 million engineering problem. The next afternoon, the prototype was ready for testing. The entire engineering team gathered in the laboratory, along with David and Rosa. They had built Rosa's multi-layer filtration system using sand, gravel, activated charcoal, and processed cactus fibers. The test water was intentionally made as dirty and challenging as possible, loaded with sediment, bacteria, and organic matter that had destroyed their membrane systems. Dr. Peterson started the test. Clean water began flowing out of Rosa's system almost immediately. After an hour, the flow rate was still steady. After 4 hours, the water quality was still perfect. "It's not clogging," Dr. Chang whispered, as if afraid to believe it. "It's not slowing down," Robert added, checking the flow meters. "The water quality is actually improving as the system runs," Patricia announced, looking at her test results. David turned to Rosa, who was standing quietly in the corner, watching the test with tears in her eyes. "Rosa," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you just saved our company. You just gave millions of people access to clean water. How does that feel?" Rosa wiped her eyes and smiled. "It feels like my grandmother would be proud." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in 8 months, David felt hope. 3 weeks after Rosa's breakthrough, David stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his office, adjusting his tie for what would be the most important presentation of his career. Today was Aquatech's quarterly company meeting, where 500 employees, major investors, and media representatives would gather to hear about the company's progress. For the first time in months, David wasn't dreading this meeting. His hands weren't shaking, and the dark circles under his eyes had finally started to fade. The prototype testing had been a complete success. Rosa's filtration system had run continuously for 21 days without a single failure, processing the dirtiest water they could create. But David wasn't just planning to announce the technical breakthrough. He was about to do something that would shock everyone in that auditorium. Rosa was at home getting ready for what she thought was just another day of work. She had no idea that David had been planning something special. Over the past 3 weeks, she had worked closely with the engineering team, helping them refine the prototype and prepare for large-scale manufacturing. The engineers who had initially been skeptical of her had become her strongest supporters. Dr. Peterson had spent hours learning about biomimetic filtration from Rosa, admitting that her approach had opened his eyes to entirely new possibilities. Dr. Chang had already begun researching other natural filtration systems, inspired by Rosa's grandmother's wisdom. "Mom, you seem different lately," Sophia had noticed over breakfast that morning. "You're smiling more. You seem excited about work." Rosa had smiled at her daughter. "Sometimes good things happen when you're brave enough to speak up, even when you're scared." Miguel, now in his final year of high school, had been amazed by his mother's story. "Mom, you saved their whole company. That's incredible. You should write a book about this." "Maybe someday," Rosa had replied, though she still couldn't quite believe what had happened herself. At 2 p.m., the Aquatech auditorium was packed. David walked onto the stage and the crowd gradually quieted down. Many of the investors in the audience looked nervous. The company's stock price was still down 60% from its peak, and rumors about the project's failure had been circulating for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice strong and confident, "3 months ago, I stood on this same stage and promised you that we would solve the greatest challenge facing our water purification technology. Today I'm here to tell you that we have not only solved that challenge, but we have revolutionized the entire approach to water filtration." He clicked to his first slide, showing the test results from Rosa's system. "Our new biomimetic filtration technology has achieved 99.7% purification efficiency, operates for months without maintenance, and costs $23 to manufacture instead of $3,000. A murmur of excitement rippled through the audience. Investors were leaning forward in their seats, and the engineers in the crowd were nodding with approval. "But that's not the most remarkable part of this story," David continued. "This breakthrough didn't come from our team of PhD engineers, though they deserve enormous credit for validating and perfecting the concept. It didn't come from our research partnerships with major universities. It didn't come from the $200 million we invested in advanced membrane technology." David paused, letting the suspense build. "This solution came from Rosa Morales, a member of our custodial staff, who has been quietly cleaning our offices while studying chemistry in her spare time and raising 2 children as a single mother. The auditorium fell completely silent. People were looking around trying to process what David had just said. Rosa grew up in a village in Guatemala, where her grandmother taught her a traditional water filtration method using local materials. What Rosa realized, and what our engineering team missed, was that this traditional method was actually a sophisticated biomimetic technology that nature perfected over millions of years. David clicked to the next slide, showing a photo of Rosa explaining her diagrams to Dr. Peterson and the engineering team. Rosa didn't just point out our mistake. She worked with our team to understand the scientific principles behind her grandmother's method. She helped us design and build the prototype. She answered technical questions that demonstrated a deeper understanding of filtration chemistry than most people with engineering degrees. The crowd was still quiet, but David could see the amazement on their faces. Today, I'm announcing several changes to our company that I believe will transform not just Aquatech, but the entire approach to innovation in our industry. David's next slide showed Rosa's new title: Chief Innovation Officer, Aquatech Solutions. Rosa Morales has been promoted to Chief Innovation Officer effective immediately. She will lead our research and development efforts, bringing fresh perspectives to complex problems and ensuring that we always consider solutions that are practical, affordable, and accessible to the communities we serve. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. People were standing, clapping, and some were wiping away tears. In the back of the auditorium, Rosa had just walked in, completely unaware of what David had announced. She was wearing her best dress and looked confused by all the commotion. David gestured for quiet. But we're not stopping there. Today, I'm also announcing the creation of the Innovation Access Program, a $50 million initiative that will actively recruit problem solvers from unconventional backgrounds. We will partner with community colleges, trade schools, and community organizations to identify people who have practical experience with the problems we're trying to solve. Dr. Peterson stood up and started applauding again. Soon the entire engineering team was on their feet. We will offer scholarships for formal education, but we will also recognize that some of the most valuable knowledge comes from real-world experience. We will create pathways for people to contribute to innovation regardless of their educational background or job title. David looked toward the back of the auditorium where Rosa was standing, her hand over her mouth in shock. "Rosa, could you please come up here?" The crowd turned to look at Rosa, who was shaking her head in disbelief. Miguel and Sofia, who had been allowed to skip school for this event, appeared beside their mother and gently encouraged her toward the stage. As Rosa walked down the aisle, the entire auditorium gave her a standing ovation that lasted almost 5 minutes. She was crying by the time she reached the stage, and David handed her a tissue. "Rosa," David said into the microphone, "you saved our company. But more importantly, you reminded us that innovation comes from curiosity, determination, and the willingness to see problems from new perspectives. You showed us that the best solutions often come from the most unexpected places." Rosa took the microphone with trembling hands. "I never imagined that my grandmother's wisdom could change so many lives," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But this isn't really about me. It's about listening to everyone's ideas, no matter who they are or where they come from. It's about remembering that we're all trying to solve problems and help people." 6 months later, Rosa's filtration system was providing clean water to over 2 million people in 43 countries. The Rosa filter, as it became known, could be built and maintained by local communities using materials available anywhere in the world. Aquatech's stock price had not only recovered but reached an all-time high. More importantly, the company's new approach to innovation had led to breakthroughs in several other areas, as employees felt empowered to share ideas regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. Rosa finished her chemistry degree through Aquatech's education program and was working on a master's degree in environmental engineering. Miguel had been accepted to medical school with a full scholarship, and Sofia was designing her own experiments inspired by her mother's work. The company's Innovation Access Program had identified dozens of people with valuable practical knowledge. A maintenance worker, who understood heat transfer better than most mechanical engineers, a cafeteria worker, who had insights into food, Preservation. A security guard who had developed creative approaches to energy conservation. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. Aquatech had become known as a company that truly listened to all its employees, that valued diverse perspectives, and that understood that the best ideas could come from anyone, anywhere, at any time. David often told the story of Rosa's breakthrough to other business leaders, emphasizing that the company's greatest asset had been cleaning their offices for months before anyone thought to ask what she knew. The next great idea might be sitting right next to you, he would say. The question is, are you listening?